Hello and welcome back for Week 14 NFL main slate DFS breakdown. We're going to be going through the whole slate, the high-owned plays, some, possible pivots you can make off them, and the slate in general. But before we do, come join us at LineStar. $39.99 per month gets you access to everything we do, all the props, all the DFS, one low price for all the sports we cover. Now, let's get into this slate. I think it's going to be a fun one. It is a little ugly looking when you're just looking at the slate as a whole. As morning set of games, there are two games over a 40-point total. One of those is a 41 point. Oh, sorry, three games over. So there's a 41-point total, 43, and a 44 in the early slate of games. And then in the afternoon, we have a 46-game total, 49, and a 44. So the afternoon is probably going to have a majority of the ownership this weekend. Now, there's a couple, obviously, key games being Buffalo and KC. Now, that game has a 49-point total. It's going to take a lot of the ownership. And with Isaiah Pacheco out, there's now a little bit of value in that game too, which makes it a little bit interesting. And surely more ownership to go there. Other high-point games, we got Seattle versus the 49ers. That is in San Francisco. That's a 46-point game total. So one of the highest game totals of the week. But the thing that's interesting here is it's a 13-point spread. The 49ers are giant favorites. They have the highest game total, team total of the week. And it makes it a fairly interesting spot to go after. Now we have the Denver and Chargers game, 44-point total. And I gotta say that I don't really love that game. Other games to go over: Indianapolis versus Cincinnati, 44-point total. And the Lions versus Bears at a 43-point total. So those are really the higher game total ones to look at. But as always, I got a few others that we want to bring up is just faster paced games. So the clear fastest paced game this week is Panthers at Saints. It's only a 38.5 total. I don't think we want either of the quarterbacks in this game, but there are some other pieces to play. One thing, though, to mention is that Taysom Hill has been on the injury report this week. If he is out, it does make Derek Carr much more interesting, as Hill takes away from Carr's red zone touchdown, upside. So now I don't really like Carr, but I do want to bring that up. So the next game we want to cover is Jacksonville at Cleveland. Now, this game total is only 33. It does look like there's weather there. So I don't think we can really, lean too much on that. The other thing here is we don't know about Trevor Lawrence. We know the Browns offense have been pretty bad all year long. However, I do say that I like the Browns a little bit more if Flacco plays. But look, that game total is only 33. The likelihood of any sort of stacking there bringing us to the promised land is probably fairly slim, especially if the weather is an issue. Now, with a couple of the games today, tomorrow, there are possible weather issues. I don't want to speak on that too much right now because things change with weather overnight. So just make sure you pay attention to what weather reports are tomorrow morning and take it from there. So the next game that is a little bit higher paced is the Rams versus Ravens. Ravens are big time favorites. It is a 40-point total. But I think there are some pieces from that game that could be interesting. And then the next two, I usually only bring up 3 faster paced games, but there are 2 more I want to bring up. Tampa Bay and the Falcons. They do play at a little faster pace. And the Falcons could speed up a lot more if Tampa Bay is able to get out to a little bit of a lead earlier, and it forces the Falcons to pass a little bit more. Lately, they have not, really liked to pass, but that Tampa Bay defense definitely tries to make you do that. And I don't know if the Falcons want to run against the strength of Tampa Bay. So that game is a little bit faster pace, but it could be much faster pace depending on how that game script goes. And then lastly, the Colts versus the Bengals. The Colts keep getting into shootouts week in and week out outside of games versus, New England. They didn't get into one. And then outside of that, I guess you could say Baltimore, Jacksonville, but look, versus Tennessee, 31-28, Tampa Bay, 27-20, 27-13 versus Carolina, 27-38 versus the Saints, 38-39 versus Cleveland. So I think this Colts versus Bengals game is interesting for DFS. The Colts play at extremely fast pace. Their defense isn't that great. It does take chances, maybe allows a couple bigger plays than normal. So I think that one is another interesting one to focus on. It is one of the higher game scores, but it is a clear game that I could see over, especially if Browning plays as well as he did against Jacksonville last week. So I think it's all in all, there's a couple different avenues to really look at on this slate that are fairly interesting. Now, as always, we'll start on DraftKings, go over some of the higher owned quarterback pieces. So first, Brock Purdy. Now, I got to bring this up first. The 49ers implied total is 29.5. Next closest is the Chiefs at 25. So a 4.5 point spread there. That is fairly significant. Now, Purdy has been very good all year long. However, the Seahawks been absolutely crushed by running backs this year. So while I like Purdy and I do not mind going to him, and I might have a little bit, and I am definitely going to have a lot of 49er exposure, I may not have a ton of Purdy because I just think this is a game that they're going to be able to do it on the ground. They're giant favorites. Also, to mention, Eli Mitchell is doubtful, so CMC may get a giant workload unless they get to a super big early lead. The 49ers aren't a team that generally take their foot off of the gas. So I think Purdy is interesting. He can totally get there, but I do like CMC a little bit more than I do like Purdy. But with that being said, you could have both of them. Purdy could definitely pass the CMC for a touchdown. But all in all, I think it is an interesting place to target. I just don't absolutely love Purdy this week. Justin Fields, I think, is interesting. One thing to note here is this does look like it is going to be the absolute slowest game of the week. Now, this Bears defense has been much better lately. However, it was 26 versus 31 at Detroit only a couple weeks ago. But outside of that game, most of the Bears games have been pretty low scoring. So I don't know if we're going to see a super high score in this game. It is a slower paced one. It is outside, not indoors in a dome. So that is a big difference. And weather, has been talked about this week in there, but it does look like the weather is actually going to be a little bit better than earlier forecast. Now, I very easily could see this game going over 43, and I would expect it goes over 43. I just don't think it's a game that's going to get up to like 60, where it really blows out the slate. Now, I definitely like Fields. I think he's an interesting play and don't mind him. And frankly, my idea is similar to Line Stars here, where we have him projected a little bit higher than Purdy and not much more. So I don't mind going to Fields. Minshew, we've talked about a lot. I do like this game environment. The one thing is that the only games that Minshew is viable is if he has a rushing touchdown. He had 2 rushing touchdowns versus Cleveland. And last week, he didn't have a rushing touchdown. Put up an okay score at 23. But 23 is just not likely to win you a GPP. And that's my problem, is I just don't think he has the ceiling we need, especially when Zach Moss is in just an absolutely great spot. Jake Browning, dude crushed it last week. Played absolutely great. Has a spectacular matchup this week. So we'll see if he can back that up. If he is able to do that again. Now, they had some broken plays. Some crazy stuff happened to get him to that point. But I think Browning's at least of interest. Josh Allen. All right. So obviously this game is the game of the week. Chiefs for Bills. It's going to look very interesting. He has a couple games of over 40 this year, couple over 30. And if you look at what he's done against KC, he's been very, very good. 16 in 2020, 27 in the conference championship. Then 40, 41, and 30 for his next 3 games against him. And this is when he's been a better quarterback. So now he's facing the Chiefs again. And it's kind of a must win for them. They are, really fighting for a playoff spot. I think they have 6 losses right now. I think it's a very, very interesting spot to go after Josh Allen when he's likely going a little under-owned here at only 12% compared to, say, 15 at Purdy, or the 5th highest owned quarterback. So I think he is interesting in a very good game environment. One thing is the Chiefs D has been very good, so that's one issue. Eagles D is very good too, but Eagles D's weakness is protecting the pass. They've been letting teams pass all over them. They just haven't let teams run on them. The Jets, been very good against the pass, put up 32 against them. So we've seen him be able to beat good defenses, and he absolutely can beat this one. We're going to take a little more time on quarterback today because I think there's some interesting ways to go. Russell Wilson, I don't like this game environment. They are playing super conservative. The Chargers D has been slightly better lately than we expected, but I don't think the Chargers right now offensively can really push the Denver team, which I think that has to happen in order for Russell Wilson to really get there. So I don't really care about Wilson. Lamar, look, he could get there. I just don't think that they're going to need him to really get pushed. And that's the only way that Lamar really gets going. All right, Patrick Mahomes. Nobody's going there. And he hasn't been good really all season. He has one game that really could have won you a GPP at 38. And that was a primetime game. So as far as a main slate, he's been almost, useless. Mid-20s is as high if you take that one primetime game out. And then lately, nothing to write home about whatsoever. Now his prices came down big time. And the Buffalo D has actually been decent at stopping the run. And without Isaiah Pacheco there, I don't think the Chiefs are going to be able to rely on the run game at all. I think it makes Mahomes much more interesting. I think Jerick McKinnon helps him big time. And then, he has Kelsey, his emergence of Rashee Rice, and then all the other kind of weapons that are just there that can help. So I think Mahomes is actually finally a little bit interesting, and in a game where it's a high game total, they're at home, I think there's a lot of things that couldn't go right. The other thing is when they get inside the 5 and they don't have Pacheco, what do? They pass. I think this game does set up for a situation where he could have that 4 or 5 touchdown game that he's been missing this year. This year he's been 1-2 touchdown guy, which just isn't normal because Pacheco keeps getting in the end zone. So I actually think Mahomes is a little interesting this week. He doesn't have, star-studded weapons, but I have interest there. I got to bring up a couple others. Ritter has been much better at home, so I got to give that to him. The only issue that I have for him is since he's got the starter position back, 21 attempts, 27 attempts, versus earlier in the season, they were letting him get into the 30s. At home are where all his best games have been. If they let him pass and get him into the mid 30 attempts, he has a chance to do okay. I don't like it though. I think there's just other cheap options like Browning that you can go to. Josh Dobbs has the rushing upside and has multiple games right around 25 points. He's slightly interesting as a dart throw. And now let's get over to FanDuel, look at their quarterbacks, and we can get into more talk there. So FanDuel, a little bit more ownership-wise as to what I'm saying, where Josh Allen, Mahomes, both very interesting options. They're getting the ownership. Browning is coming next at, a huge discount. The one thing I have to say here, if this Allen Mahomes game goes off, the Bills Chiefs game goes off, no chance any other quarterback is going to keep up with that game. The only other guy that could do it would be Purdy. Purdy on FanDuel, only 5% owned. So I think he is a little more interesting on FanDuel, as that game does project to be a huge blowout. Seattle has been getting crushed on the ground or by running back. But if it's a big blowout, there's obviously going to be touchdowns. Purdy very easily could have a multiple touchdown game. So he's at least in consideration. And on FanDuel, I think you got to consider Fields a little bit with having his rushing upside versus a poor secondary. I have some interest there for sure. Put up 21 against him last game, 100 rushing yards without a rushing TD. And last couple times he's faced him, he's just been crushing him on the ground. 147 versus him last year, 132 in the second game, 104 last game. You can definitely, Fields will definitely be able to run against him. So I think he's interesting and fairly safe because of that rushing upside. Now getting over to matchups. So Zach Wilson has a solid matchup on paper, but it's Zach Wilson, so we're not going there. Minshew, great matchup. But, my feelings on Minshew. Mahomes, great matchup. Allen's on the other side. Fairly good matchup. Chiefs have been decent against quarterbacks this year. As you can see, Jordan Love is really the only one that's got to him and put up 23. Outside of that, Hurts 20, Wilson almost 20, Tua only 12. Quarterbacks have had a little bit of a rough time, but we've also shown Allen has done very well versus this Chiefs D in the past. DTR has a decent matchup. I really hope it's Flacco. If it's Flacco, I think this spot looks a little more interesting. At this point, we don't really know if it's DTR or Flacco. Flacco has been elevated to the team, but no official notice yet. Ritter, we know, has a decent matchup, but they haven't wanted to throw lately. So a little bit of I don't know there for them. And let's get into the running backs. So high-owned, CMC, Zach Moss, Javonte Williams, Bijan Robinson. So CMC, I think you can get just all on board of the CMC train this week. He looks absolutely great. There's probably not a ton of spots we can really count on 25 plus points, and you can kind of count on 25-ish for him, especially in a matchup where Eli Mitchell is doubtful. What we have seen all season is CMC just plays an insane amount of snaps when Mitchell's doubtful. So I don't mind going pretty heavy on CMC, even though he has that higher ownership. He has pretty much 4 30-point games. 30-point game this week is going to get you there. 25, you're not going to be mad at it. You would have paid a little bit too much for that. But I do think that one or two players on this 49er offense are going to be in the optimal lineup. So I think CMC is a very likely one to be there. Zach Moss, I'm going to have a ton of Zach Moss. Big time chalk last week. His prices came up a little bit, but this workload is just great. And Cincinnati DVOA versus running back is like 29th. So I think it's a just great spot in a game environment that I like to attack. Javonte Williams. Chargers have actually been much better versus running back this year than years prior. A little bit worse over the last 4 games, but I don't love Javonte. I do think his price is probably a little bit low, so I don't mind getting there, but it's kind of a mess spot to me. But John Robinson is another mess spot, but his workload, his ability at 6,500 is pretty legit, and I absolutely understand trying to get there with both of those things together. The other thing is that Tampa Bay's run D has been quite as good lately as it was earlier in the season. They've been dealing with some injuries. Some of those guys are coming back, but it is kind of an interesting spot. I think Kamara, super interesting. Carolina has just been getting crushed by running backs. The one thing here is that Kamara does get a ton of his value through the air, and the Panthers have been decent versus running backs through the air. They've got crushed on the ground, and while Kamara can definitely do it on the ground, he is not quite as good in that category. So maybe his floor is a little bit lower this week. His ceiling is obviously, sky high, but the floor might not be quite as high as it generally is. David Montgomery, the Chiefs, or the Bears run D has actually been extremely good, and I don't love going to him this week, especially in a split backfield. Austin Eckler, I think you can absolutely take some shots here. There's been some coach speak this week that for the rushing carries, they may take some away from Eckler just because he hasn't been very good. But that could just be coach speak. They paid him more money this offseason. He's been good for them for years. He's just had some off games. So I don't mind kind of buying the dip in his price a little bit there. I'm just not going to have a ton of him. And this Broncos weakness has been clearly on the ground. So I think Eckler is interesting, but I'm not going to go overboard. I think his price still is a little bit too high for his ability so far this season. Definitely interested in having some, though. I do think Gibbs is more interesting than Montgomery for the Lions this week. The reason being is he can do work through the air, and I think that's really how they're going to have to get to Chicago. If you look, last time they played, 6 receptions, 59 receiving yards. I could see him doing something similar to this for sure this week. So I think he is of interest. Kyren Williams, I got to bring up. The guy has been extremely good when he's played this season. Week 1, splitting the backfield, 17 points. 28 week 2, 31 week 4, 25 versus Arizona, then coming back with 41 and 20 versus Cleveland. He's been routinely, in the 20s, and at 7,300 in a matchup that, it's okay. The weakness of this Ravens D is definitely on the ground. I think Kyren is interesting. Over to FanDuel. High owned guys, CMC, Moss, Brees, Madison. Brees Hall, I don't love it. He just simply hasn't been very good this year. He could get to the Texans. I just don't expect it. This offense is just awful. And we talked about everybody else. Matchup wise, CMC on top of the board. Like I said, Seattle's been terrible versus running back. Mixon is of interest, and it's a game we like. I just really like Zach Moss a little more. But everybody's going to be on Moss. Mixon's going to be totally overlooked, so it is an interesting level. leverage option. Madison was splitting carries going into their bye. If it is his job again, I think there's a little bit of interest versus the Raiders. Singletary wasn't the primary ball carrier last game. No idea what was going on there. I think James Cook has a little bit of an interest as he can do it through the air and the ground. The issue here is, does he get in the end zone or not? Very hard to know for him just because he doesn't have total control of the goal line work. Clyde Edwards-Helaire and McKinnon. This is a conversation we need to talk about. Look, it is likely that CEH is going to start and be the RB1. And I say that with quotations because I don't think he's going to get all of the work. I think he maybe gets 55% of the snaps, but McKinnon gets 45, or maybe it's 50-50. But I think McKinnon's the one you want to have in this matchup. Buffalo run D has been fairly good recently, only allowing 78 yards on the ground over the last 4. CEH has never been that impressive on the ground. I think McKinnon through the air is a very, very interesting option. Not only are you going to get different if you have him and Mahomes and even, Travis Kelce, I think that's a super enticing trio to, stack with. And you could even have a run back with Bills in there. And you're not like totally breaking the bank. I think it's an interesting way to attack the slate and be a little bit different. So I'm interested in either one of them, but I am just more interested in McKinnon. I think there's more upside there. I think CEH's most likely outcome, 6 to say 15 points. And while 15 at his price, is very nice, not necessarily just going to win you a GPP. Eckler down here at the bottom of the matchups tool should be brought up just because Denver's D has gotten much better over the second half of this season. Javonte, very bottom versus Chargers. All right, wide receiver matchup here. So Keenan Allen, Elijah Moore, Drake London being the high-owned guys with Ayuk and Rice and Flowers all right underneath. So Keenan Allen, this is my issue with him in this spot. 1, Denver been extremely good through the past, especially the last, 4 or 5 games. And the only time Keenan really goes nuts is when he gets these games where it's, 15, 20 target, where it's just absolute crazy shootouts. And I just don't see that happening this week. Could he be hyper targeted? Yes. Absolutely, even in a lower scoring game. But I don't think Denver's offense is going to be able to push the Chargers. And the Chargers, what we've seen out of them the last few weeks, their offense has been absolutely terrible. So maybe that's the fact they played the Packers in Lambeau, the Ravens, who's a very good defense, and then the Patriots in New England. It could just be that, and maybe I am wrong on this, but I don't absolutely love Keenan this week. His target share should be there, though. They're super injured all over the wide receiver core. I just don't expect a 15-target game out of him. Elijah Moore, I would say it's only interesting if Flacco's there. He got 12 targets, and there's been really no other game that he's been targeted like that. So if Flacco's the quarterback, fire him up. Drake London is way too cheap. 4,600 in home games. He's averaging 70 yards a game. Definitely, is the wide receiver there. It's just there is some risk because this team hasn't been passing a lot. But I think London is in a smash spot. I've bet his over yards on, player props all over the place. Ayuk, Debo, Kittle, CMC, all of them are in great spots. I'm going to have a lot of the 49ers. Rashee Rice is the new guy here. So 9 targets last week, 10 the week before. He's around 70% snap share week in and week out now. I think he is absolutely interesting and don't mind having some of him. I do think it's a little bit of a tough matchup for him, though. Flowers. Evans, I think, is super interesting. Doing an Evans and London stack is interesting. One thing with this game, I did talk about both these QBs a little bit, and if I play those QBs in a lineup, I'm going to definitely have a run back from the other team, whether it be London for Mayfield or for Ritter, Evans, or Godwin. All of these guys are interesting. I will say I think Gabe Davis is super interesting once again. 5,800. He gets it done. He's had some big games versus KC in the past. Had a good game last week. Could get there again. Monra's fine. Debo I like a lot. Jamar, game environment we love. Prices come down. Huge game last week. 12 targets. He's probably a target monster once again this week. And over on FanDuel, Amon-Ra, Chase, and Adams. Chase, obviously in a good spot. Amon-Ra, the guy gets a touchdown or 100 yards in every game. This is the only game he did not get 100 yards or a touchdown this season, and he had 95 yards. So he's as consistent as they come. Don't mind going there. My one thing is that I just don't think he breaks the slate. Devontae Adams, they've been struggling with O'Connell. Just can't fully get it going. He's an okay play. I just don't think there's a huge ceiling there. Chris Olave, I think, is interesting if he plays. He is expected to play. That should be said as well. And matchup tool. All right, so wide receiver 1. If Flacco plays, I'm interested in Cooper. I think it's a decent spot for him. Big if, though. Justin Jefferson with Dobbs. Look, you could go Dobbs and Jefferson in a stack, and I don't hate it. Dobbs has been good except for that last game. So whether defenses figured him out or he just played like bad is to be seen, but I can see you going there. DJ Moore, he absolutely crushed this Detroit team last time. 7 for 96 and a touchdown. He's had some giant games. Can definitely go there. The thing that's nice about the Bears is it's either Kmet or Fields, and that's where they throw it. Judy, Flowers, Olave, Evans, all in decent matchups with Metcalf and Chase all there. Metcalf is fairly interesting comeback, but I do like Lockett a little bit more. WR2, Lockett right there. Gibbs, Ayuk, all at the top there, as well as Godwin. So all guys we've kind of talked about a little bit, which are interesting. And lastly, let's get over to the tight end spot. High-owned guys, Otten, Pitts, and Njoku. Fine with all of them, but just don't love any of them. Otten, I think he is very interesting, probably a little bit too cheap in a decent game environment. Pitts, essentially the wide receiver 2 there. Njoku has some game-breaking ability, but too many questions, quarterback and defensive-wise there. Travis Kelce, I think, is a very interesting one. People are off him because he just hasn't been the Travis Kelce of old so far this year, but look what he's done against Buffalo. 22 last year, 24, 18, 40, 23. There is some major upside here. I think he is of interest in a slate where really probably the only person that could keep up with him point-wise is Kittle. And Kittle's going a little overlooked as well. I think Kittle has some interest too. It's just that 49er offense is hard to pick which of the 4 guys is going to go nuts. But one of them will. Hawkinson, obviously in consideration, but with Justin Jefferson there, may not get quite as many targets. And Kincaid, going totally overlooked in a game we like. We do need to pay attention, though. Knox has practiced this week, and I have not seen if he is going to play yet this week, but if he does, definitely hurts Kincaid's upside a little bit. And Taysom is interesting if he's playing. He has foot and hand issues, but we'll see what's up there. Definitely do have some interest if he is playing. And on FanDuel for tight end, Njoku, Pitts, likely we haven't talked about, but Rams, terrible versus tight end. Likely is stepping in as the backup. Got 6 targets last week. Very, very easily, could have a good game versus a poor tight end D. So I do like going to likely in that game. Komet is fine. Laporta is fine. Kelsey, I do really like, and Kincaid, I think, is interesting. And if we go to the tight end matchups, Pitts is on the top. Kylan Granson is somebody that Shannon is high on this week. She has bet him in prop markets, and he has shown some upside on DraftKings at 2,600. You could do worse about, a game environment which could very easily go way above this total. And he's had some games. His one thing is that he has 1 touchdown in his career that came week 2. If he finds the end zone, though, he at 2,600 could break a slate. Laporta's higher up here. Kittle, likely, all interesting. Kelsey is towards the bottom, but I do need to bring this up with Kelsey. Look at the tight ends he's played. Bates, Mike, Ingram, Waller, Henry, Otton, Irv Smith, Troutman. They just haven't played many tight ends, so we don't truly know if they're good versus tight ends or it's just they haven't played a good one. So I think Kelsey is interesting and in a spot where people might be thinking that it's a really tough matchup. So that'll do it for us today. A little bit longer. We dove in way deeper than we should have, but because I'm doing this on Saturday instead of Friday, I just had a little bit more information to talk about. So sorry about it being a little long. Put it on 1.5x so you can get it all in within 20 minutes and you're good to go. Anyways, you guys have a good one. Good luck this weekend, and let's make some money. See you guys. Bye.